A little note of history, and this is from before your time, but the state's appropriation for the PASHE system for 2018-19 was an increase of $15 million over the prior year. The union contract for that same time frame included pay raise that amounted to a total cost increase of about $19 million. So that means for every dollar of increased funding over that time frame, it was met with $1.25 in pay and benefits increases. And the individual pay increases for professors over that time ranged from 5 to 7.5%, which is much out of step with the parents paying tuition and the taxpayers that are footing the bill for the state appropriations. As Representative Brown had previously mentioned, your predecessor last year described a disconnect between the negotiation of labor contracts and the budgeting process that enables those contracts to be funded. Additionally, at 13 of the 14 institutions in the system, expenses exceeded revenue. System-wide enrollment has declined by over 21,000 students over the last several years. That's a loss of nearly 1/5 of enrollment since 2010. So with the system's status quo facing deficits, does a $15 million state increase funding a $19 million pay raise make sense? And what can be done to address this disconnect that your predecessor mentioned?
So a lot of things go on there too. So let me start with the obvious. We need to align our costs with our enrollment. Forget enrollment. We need to align our costs with our revenue, right? Wherever the sources of that revenue come from, and that revenue is driven by enrollment. And that's true all over the shop. And there are any number of expenditures you could point to over the last year which would account for the $15 million, and you'd maybe ask questions about how they were spent as well, and you probably should. So that's something we need to get our arms around. I think the second question, the second aspect we've touched on before, is that our success is a collective responsibility. It's our collective accountability, right? I'm happy to lead. We've talked a lot about presidents working together in new ways. It's going to require our working with our union leadership in wholly new ways. And we're putting in place that kind of collaborative infrastructure. And, and there's only so many places to spend money. If you put it in somewhere, it's got to come out of somewhere else because of the reasons that you've addressed. Yeah.
And I appreciate that. So certainly aligning costs with enrollment, I think, is a theme that we've heard from this hearing, and I think it's something that will certainly be a welcome conversation going forward. And that being said, the budget request from PASHE is for an 8.1% increase this year. I believe the governor's budget includes a 1.5% increase. And so I guess my question related to those proposals out there: if the budget this year authorizes an increase of any sort, what sort of assurances can you give us that the funds will be used to strengthen the system rather than creating further structural imbalance? And furthermore, how can we square a funding increase request against declining enrollment and the need to align those two?
Yeah. So I submitted that appropriations request in my first month.
Understood, that's a challenge.
It was a challenge. It's a cost to carry. It is not outcomes-oriented or goal-driven. My intention is to never submit another request like that. I'm not going to make it for October, but I will make it for the next October, and I may be able to have a revision by February because of the work that I'm doing with my colleagues and their staff. So I think that's a modest step. I'm sorry, I forgot the question.
Just how can we receive assurances that going forward that the funding increase will be aligned with strengthening the system rather than?
I'll be able to submit with the October appropriations process. You will have a clear understanding of what the execution path looks like for this redesign and what the ROI is on that. You will have a clear understanding of what our accountability structure and performance management systems are and what they will look like. And you'll have a clear understanding of what our shared services potential return on investment will look like. You'll have a better understanding overall of what our budget and our budget trade-off decisions have been, so that we can have a reasonable conversation, not about the overall budget and how it aligns with our revenues, but about the overall budget and how specific allocations suggested within it align with and help us achieve specific goals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think this is a helpful trajectory for us to get started. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do. I commend you for taking it on. Thank you.
Thanks so much.